Hello, my name is Dan Lin, and welcome to this course, Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner, brought to you by Pact Publishing. I've used Grunt for almost 2 years, and this course was designed to show you how to use Grunt to automate your development workflow and is intended to be helpful to anyone who is developing a website and has a basic understanding of JavaScript. Before we begin with the course, there are a few things you need to know. The course has been divided into 7 sections. Getting started with Grunt will be the first section, followed by a section called Running Grunt, where we'll talk about the different ways Grunt can be run. Then we'll move on to the section on code compiling, in which you'll see how Grunt can handle the compilation of many different types of languages. We'll also cover file manipulation, in which you will learn how you can manipulate files, including moving, optimizing, and renaming them. After that, we'll move on to the slightly larger sections on testing and deployment, as there's a lot to cover there. As testing is a comprehensive topic in itself, we'll briefly touch upon how you can use JSLint and Karma. In the next section on deployment, we'll talk about how to create a deployment workflow. We'll first create a deployment package that excludes development files and optimizes. Then we'll upload the resulting package to a server. Finally, we'll wrap up the course by running some custom commands. The main prerequisite to this course is to have Node and Node Package Manager installed on your machine. Node is a JavaScript technology that runs on your machine. It has the ability to do things like run web servers, but we won't be using any of its features. What we're interested in is the NPM. NPM will allow us to install plugins and make it easy for the next person who comes along to work on the project with the same tool. In this video, we went through what will be covered in this course and the prerequisites such as Node Package Manager, referred to as NPM, that allows us to install everything. In the next video, we'll see how Grunt can help automate menial tasks. Welcome to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. This is the first section, Getting Started with Grunt. In this section, we'll discuss what is Grunt and configuring plugins. This is the second video, What is Grunt? In this video, we'll cover what a task runner is and why you'd want to use one. We'll also talk about how to use Grunt to save time when developing and the technologies that are used with Grunt. As developers, we often have small tasks like JSLint and concatenating files that we can perform that can greatly improve the quality of our deliverables, but because they are either time-consuming or only rarely produce results, we don't always do them. But with Grunt, we have the ability to automate these tasks. Adding these actions as Grunt tasks allows us to call them directly as part of a larger task pipeline or as part of a watch command. This is particularly handy as you can have Grunt running in the background and it will automatically detect changes to files and act on them if appropriate. Grunt is a task runner. Anything that can be automated can be a task. A task runner is just the application that runs the task at the appropriate time. You may already be familiar with some types of task runners like Unix cron jobs or preprocessors like Sass or CodeKit. Grunt uses the JavaScript technology, which is a language that most web developers are familiar with. Normally, JavaScript is run by a browser when you visit a page, but with Node.js, you can run JavaScript applications on the server. For the purposes of running Grunt, it allows you to run the Grunt application locally. Grunt has many plugins available that tie into just about every utility you can think of for development. On the Grunt website, you can browse through thousands of plugins that can accomplish things like image minification, file concatenation, packaging, and deployment. You can then chain these together to produce complex workflows that can save you enormous amounts of time and ensure a high-quality output. In this video, we discussed that Grunt is a task runner, the Node.js and JavaScript technologies that it runs on, and how to use the Node Package Manager. The next video will cover installing plugins. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. This is the third video in the first section, Getting Started with Grunt, configuring plugins. We covered what Grunt was in the last video, and now in this video we'll cover how to install plugins locally, how to install them on existing projects, and some considerations we should take into account with respect to source control. Finally, we'll discuss auto-loading plugins. To install a plugin locally is fairly simple, but we want to make sure we include the save dev flag. This will save the information about the plugin and the version in the package.json file in addition to installing the plugin. The basic command is npm install whatever the plugin name is, and then the -- save dev. Installing modules on an existing project is dead simple thanks to the -- save -dev flag we used when we first installed the plugin. We simply navigate to the directory and type npm install, and that's it. Pat yourself on the back for thinking ahead while the plugins install. When you're in development, your node_modules folder can get pretty large just with the plugins that you've installed. Since it doesn't make sense to clog up your source control with this info, you should take a moment to add an exclusion for this folder in your source control. This usually means Git these days, so go to your .gitignore file and add node_modules to it. Go to github.com for more information on Git and excluding files from source control. Now we'll talk about loading plugins. Normally, when you install a plugin, you have to come in here to your grunt file and add grunt.load_npm-tasks and the name of the module that you just loaded. But there's actually a plugin that will load any plugin that you have installed already. Now we'll do the same as before, where we do npm install load-grunt-tasks-save-dev. Now back in our editor, we'll take all these load npm tasks and delete them. And we'll replace it with this. Require load grunt tasks. Then we'll add the grunt at the end. And that's it. From now on, you'll no longer have to add the load npm tasks line when adding new plugins. Awesome. In this video, we talked about installing plugins both initially and on an existing project, and how we should handle the plugins in source control. We also saw how adding the load npm tasks line can be cumbersome, and how the load grunt tasks plugin can help us with that. Congratulations! This concludes section 1, where we also talked about saving time with grunt, the types of activities we can do with grunt, and npm and the prerequisites. The next section is running grunt, where we'll look at the different ways we can run grunt. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. By now you've learned what grunt is, the technologies behind it, and how to install plugins. This is the second section called Running Grunt. In this section, we'll discuss the basic ways to run grunt, some of the basic tasks that are available, and how to get a project started. This is the first video in the second section called Running Grunt. Ways to run grunt. In this video, we'll focus on running a simple grunt task with grunt and how it gets assigned in the grunt file. Don't worry about not having your own grunt file to work with. We'll go over some basic concepts first, then show you how to get your grunt file started. The first thing we'll do is install our plugin. We'll type npm install grunt-jslint-save-dev, hit return. This will download it to our node_modules folder. In this grunt file, I'll explain how a task is being assigned and how to call it. Here you'll see that there's one entry in the main array of the grunt file. The top level is jslint. If you look further down, you'll see that it's been registered as a task with the key of lint. If we go over to our terminal and we use that same command as the key, grunt lint, you'll see that it now runs it. If we wanted to add a CSS linter to that, we could do that by first installing it like we did with jslint. Don't forget that --save-dev. Then once that's installed, we head back over to our editor. We add the options. I'm just copying and pasting the info from the README file of the plugin page that I just installed. I'll get rid of this top one that says strict. We'll be lax today. And I'll make sure this actually points to my CSS. The **/* means match anything. Now we'll go down here to our register line. We'll add CSS lint. Hit save. Go over to our terminal and run that again. And then you can see it's running our CSS lint. One of the special things that grunt can do is watch certain folders and look for changes and run tasks if anything changes. So I'm going to add watch tasks CSS lint, and then for files, I'm going to look for **/**-CSS, any CSS file in my project. I'll hit save. I'll go over to my terminal, type grunt watch, And now it'll automatically look for any changes to those CSS files and run CSS lint anytime they do. I have a CSS file. Nothing here worth noting except that I'm going to change something, introduce some purposeful errors, and just hit save to see what our terminal does. We go over here, and all of a sudden you can see that it's running. In this video, we learned the basics of running grunt tasks, how to chain them together, and how to use a watch command. Take a breather, as that was a lot to take in. In the next video, we'll talk about some of the different use cases that Grunt is really good at. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. In the last video, we talked about all the different ways we can run Grunt tasks. This is the second video in the second section, Running Grunt, called Grunt Use Cases. In this video, we're going to talk about all the different types of tasks we can accomplish and also how we can run these tasks simultaneously. There isn't really a limit to what you can do with Grunt. If you wanted to send a flag to your home automation system to turn on your Nintendo 64 whenever you changed a file called mario.txt, you could do that. Looking through the plugin page, it's easy to see the breadth of what's available. Some tasks focus on clean code files and projects, and some focus on deploying code. Some provide even more focus on firing unrelated but supporting activities. Concatenating files is an easy way to conserve HTTP requests in a web application. Using grunt-contrib-concat, we can make that happen easily with simple command. Unit testing our JavaScript is always recommended, and again, Grunt makes this easy. But don't get your hopes up though. You still have to write your own tests. As developers, we should always be optimizing our images, but that can be very time-consuming. Using something like imagemin, we can make sure that happens without thinking about it. You can set up deployment tasks to automatically deploy all project pieces to the proper places. Keep in mind that all of these can be combined with each other and also be triggered on a watch command. This allows for some seriously complex workflows. Here I've set up a workflow that runs my tests, concatenates my files, optimizes my images, then sends it all up to a server via an rsync command. Now that we've seen workflow for Grunt, let's see how to run Grunt tasks concurrently. Sometimes you may have a task that takes a lot of time. If that's the first task that you've assigned, then the rest will be waiting until your first task ends. To avoid this, we can use a technique where we can have multiple tasks running at the same time, which will reduce the amount of time that the entire process takes. Let's clear our console and reinstall the grunt-concurrent plugin. Remember that --save dev. The configuration for this is essentially listing the targets and which tasks should be run concurrently. In this example, we'll use concat and imagemin running at the same time. We'll set up our concurrent target and then change our task assignments to this call instead. And now you'll see when I run grunt concurrent that it'll run both at the same time. In this video, we learned about some of the basic things you can do with Grunt and how they can all be tied together to create complex workflows. We also saw how to run tasks concurrently to cut down on build time. In the next video, we'll talk about how to get your project started and initialized with Grunt. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. This is the third video in the second section of Running Grunt called Initializing Grunt. In the last video, we talked about some of the things we can accomplish with Grunt. In this video, we'll talk about how to initialize a project and get a lot of this set up out of the box. Using the grunt-init command, we can initialize a project very quickly. Let's set up a basic Grunt file using the grunt-init-gruntfile plugin. First, let's install it. npm install grunt-init, and we're going to use the G flag to make sure it gets installed globally. There you go, installing it locally. Next, we'll install the grunt-init-gruntfile plugin. This command is a little different, as we'll just use git. If you aren't using git, you probably should be, but you can download the files and place them in the home directory /grunt-init folder. Now we'll run that command by running grunt-init-gruntfile. You'll be asked if you want to be using the DOM, probably. whether you'll be using concatenation or minification, probably. Then finally, if you'll have a package. Say yes to all these. Nope, everything looks good, and you'll notice the N is uppercase. That just means it's the default. And that's it. You now have a grunt file to work with. Take a break and check out all of the fine tasks available to you out of the box now. There's concatenation, JS hint, QUnit tests, and even some watch commands. In this video, we learned how we can use grunt-init to get a quick jumpstart on our project. That wraps up this section, in which we also learned about some of the basic ways to run grunt and some of the basic things we can accomplish. The following section should be a fairly quick one on code compiling. See you soon. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. Last section we talked about some of the different ways we can run grunt. This is the third section, compiling code. In this section we'll explore yet another way with grunt-connect and compile some Sass using the Compass add-on library. Then we'll talk about targets. This is the first video in that section, using grunt-connect. In this video, we'll talk about how we can use grunt to launch a small web server to test our changes. This comes in handy if you're on a machine that doesn't have Apache set up. First thing we'll do is install it. We'll type npm install grunt-contrib-connect --save-dev. Then once this is done, we'll head over to our editor. And now we're looking at the options for the Connect Server plugin. Port 9001 sets the port, just in case you have a default at 80 already or want to set it a different one. Protocol can be set to HTTPS if you want to test it with SSL, however you'll need a certificate and all that. The host name, localhost, can be set to whatever you want. Base is the base of your application. One dot is the default and signifies the same directory as grunt. If you wanted to serve the files from a subdirectory, you would enter that here. The default is null to let it default to the root of the grunt project. The open setting automatically opens a browser window when it opens, and keep alive is needed to actually be able to browse it. Otherwise it just closes as soon as it's connected. Now by using grunt-connect in our terminal, we can launch our site. Make sure you have an index.html page to display though. In this video, we learned how to use grunt-connect to launch a server so we could view our work. The next video will go over how to use Compass to compile Sass into CSS. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. This is the second video in the third section, compiling Sass with Compass. The last video introduced us to Grunt Server. In this video, we'll install grunt-contrib-compass to compile our Sass into CSS. Then we'll take a look at live reload. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Sass, it's a way to write CSS in a nested way using modern programming techniques like variables and functions that then gets compiled into regular CSS. Compass is the tool we'll use to compile the Sass code into CSS. Same as before, we'll install the plugin, making sure to have our save dev flag on there. This also assumes that you have Compass installed via gem install compass, which requires Ruby. That's a little more than this class can talk about. These are the couple required options for Compass. Sass directory, where your Sass is, and CSS directory, where the results go. We could use other options like config to specify an external options file, but you should always check the plugin documentation for the full list of options. The dist node here is there in case you want to use targets. More on that later. Now in our watch command down here at the bottom, we'll add Sass. We have files here, double star and the single star to specify any SCSS file, and then it'll run the task for Compass. That will trigger whenever a file in the Sass folder is changed. By now you should have about 4 windows open. Your editor with your grunt file and your SCSS file, a terminal with your watch command, a terminal with your grunt-connect command, and the browser window that spawned this. Now we're going to use a tool called live reload. Live reload requires a couple things. One, we'll add this option to our watch command, live reload equals true, and then we have to make sure that our actual browser connects to the live reload. So I'm using a browser plugin, the live reload browser plugin, and I'll hit that and it's connected. Now we'll go back to our editor. We'll go to our SCSS file, I'll make a small change. I'll change the background to teal. We'll hit save. You'll see that this changes on our watch, and our browser window is now changed to teal. There are many other things that you can compile. Markdown or Haml fans can use shorthand and have it compile to full HTML. CoffeeScript is another good candidate for compiling it into JavaScript. This video talked about how to use Compass and Live Reload to compile our CSS and automatically refresh the browser. In the next video, we'll talk about targets. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. In the final video of this section, we're going to talk about targets and when and why they can come in handy. The CSS output for this file is great for debugging. It shows it nested like it would be in the SCSS along with the line number comments, but that's not the best for production. For a production site, we'd want something more like this. To do this, we just had to make some adjustments to the Compass options. We added a second target. We have dev and prod now. And we added these options. Output style compressed. That makes it all on one line. It gets rid of all the comments. And then we got rid of the line comments with no line comments equals true. Now we'll adjust our normal watch task to only target dev. We don't need to do prod all the time. And then a little further down here, you'll see that I have Compass prod built into a build task. We'll come back to that one later. Now we can call grunt, compass, dev to do our normal compiling. Grunt, compass, prod to do our compact compiling, or good old grunt watch to have it do the dev on command. This video covered targets and how you can build differently. This section was a doozy covering grunt connect to serve pages, grunt compass to compile our CSS, and grunt targets to get us different output for different situations. Consider taking a break. The next section will be fairly a short one compared to this, in that we'll be looking into file manipulation. See you soon. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. In the last section, we discussed code compiling and running a basic grunt server. In this section, we'll talk about file manipulation. In this section, we'll take a look at moving and renaming our files. We will also see how to minify and concatenate them, and finally, modify our images. This specific video will talk about moving and renaming files. First, we'll do a quick install of grunt-contrib-copy. Make sure you get your save dev flag in there. Now we'll go take a look at a configured task that copies our CSS from our dev directory into a dist directory with a .prod.css suffix. We'll only use this in our build task, so we'll just call the target main and put everything in there. We'll add expand true. This gives us a lot more options. Then we'll add cwd. This tells us the current working directory. And this makes sure it only looks at CSS files. The double star makes it look in any folder. The dest is destination, and that's where this CSS will end up. Then there's a function to rename it. And you see it takes two arguments, the dest and the source. And then we return the destination / the source substring. This is taking off the suffix here with this substring. And then it adds .prod.css. And then finally, flatten means it doesn't copy the file structure of the original destination and just puts everything into one directory. Now we can run grunt copy, and it will copy those files to the proper locations with the proper naming convention. In this video, we learned how to copy and rename files. The next video will go over concatenation and minification. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. This is the second video in the fourth section, concatenation and minification. The last video in our series talked about file moving and renaming. In this one, we'll discuss CSS and JS concatenation and minification. One note first before we move on is that from here on out, I'll be skipping the install of plugins and just noting that it's required. So one more time, you're going to want to install grunt-contrib-concat and grunt-contrib-cssmin. Let's look at our concat script. We'll concat all files from the CSS directory into one file in a new process folder. Now we'll take a look at our copy script, and you'll see that we have this current working directory of process. Concat grabs them all and puts them all into one file called site.css in the process/CSS folder. Then it finally gets moved and renamed to the dist destination. Keep in mind that we can do the same things with JavaScript. Now we'll take a look at our CSS min task. This is a very simple task that uses grunt-contrib-cssmin and minifies everything in our dist folder. In case you're curious, minification just makes it as small as possible. Thus we saw how to concatenate and minify our files. In the next video, we'll take a look at image manipulation. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. This video will be talking about image manipulation. And we'll also take a look at responsive images and grunt newer. The first task we'll work on is image minification. This is one of the features of Grunt that got me really excited because while image minification is easy and everybody should be doing it, it doesn't always get done that often. We use Grunt to watch certain folders for new images and act when it sees them. Obviously, I've installed the imagemin plugin, but I've also installed the imagemin program itself. Keep in mind that while you may install the Grunt plugin, if you don't have the underlying program, it won't necessarily be installed with the plugin. So once those are installed, my task looks like this. The options should be familiar. Current working directory. This is just like the other one. This is where we're looking for those images. Source, the types of files that we're looking for, and the destination for where those will end up. Now we'll go down and we'll make sure this is added to our images right here. So now it's looking at any files under this directory that match this scheme, and then it will run imagemin dynamic. Now we'll run grunt watch, and we'll head over to our finder, and I'll take an image and drop it into this folder, and then you'll see that it's added and minified. Next, we'll use a script to automatically create different size images for delivery to browsers that support the picture element. The plugin we'll use is called Grunt Responsive Images. I've just copied and pasted the config from the README of the plugin. It shows a few different sizes that it will create, and the directories that it's looking for, and where it will put them. Now we'll add it to our watch command. Responsive right here. These are the files it looks for, and this is where it put them. Now you'll see when I take an image and drop it into this image folder, and I have my destination folder over here on the right, you can see as the images get created. There they are. Now we'll head back to our editor, and we'll take the responsive task, and we'll put it before our images task. That way, the responsive ones will get optimized too. Great job! It's great to run these operations on your images. However, every time you call this task, it's going to run the operations on all of the images in that folder. By using grunt newer, you can ensure that these are only run on files that have changed, drastically reducing the amount of time needed to run the task. Now we'll do a quick install of grunt newer, then go back to our editor to configure. Newer is one of the easier tasks to configure because you simply add it as a prefix to any tasks you want to do. Now it will only pick up the new images when they come up. In this video, we saw how to modify our images and how to use grunt newer. In this section, we covered moving and renaming files, concatenation and minification, image manipulation, and how to use grunt newer. In the next section, we'll discuss using grunt to run your tests. Save a file and get instant test results. Bye for now. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript Task Runner. Last section we talked about file manipulation, and this section will be a hefty one in which we talk about a number of different ways we can use grunt to test our code. We'll start off light with how to use JSLint with grunt to test our syntax, and then we'll make sure we're testing our own grunt file. Then we'll add a custom test task. After we've installed grunt-contrib-JSLint, We'll leave the options out for now and just run it against our JS folder here. We'll add a new test task at the bottom here for grunt. Register task test with JS lint. Now we'll go to our terminal and we'll run grunt test and we'll see no problems. Now back in my editor, I'm going to introduce a random period and hit save. I'm going to go back to my terminal. I'm going to run grunt test again. Error! Oh noes! Back to our editor, we'll remove that period, hit save, go back and test that again, and everything should be fine. Now I'm going to go ahead and add our grunt file to this. That way we can know if we have any errors in that. We'll hit save, we'll go over here and we'll run it, and we'll see all sorts of errors. Notice all these at columns? That simply means that my formatting is different than what JSLint is asking for. We'll make a quick change here to fix that. Up here at the top, I'll add a couple comments here. Global require, this makes require already available. White space, this just makes it so it ignores my white space differences because I happen to like 2 spaces, not 4. Devel means I can use console without any errors. And I can use unused parameters in my functions. That just means if I'm using a function that's already defined and I'm not going to use all the parameters, it won't throw an error for that. Make sure you look at the documentation for JSLint to make sure you know all of the options available to you. Now we'll go back over to our console. We'll run this again. All good, including my grunt file. Now we'll come back to our editor. We'll go down to our watch statement. And we'll make sure that here we add our JS. So we'll add a JS node there, make sure we get a comma there. Files. We're going to look for anything in that JS folder. And we'll add our grunt file. Then we're going to tell it what tasks to run. Pretty simple, we're going to run JSLint. Alright, we'll give that a save. Go back to our terminal. We'll do grunt watch. Now we'll test it by making a small change here. Let's introduce an error. Add a random letter. Oh no, there's our error right there. So now we can constantly keep this up to date. This video taught us how to test syntax errors using JSLint and how to check multiple files and paths. The next video will go over unit testing with QUnit. Hi again, and welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript task runner. The last video in our series talked about using Grunt to trigger JSLint. In this one, we're going to discuss QUnit. Now we're going to want to install QUnit. Remember that save dev flag. And now we're going to go ahead and install grunt-contrib-QUnit-save dev. Now we'll add the basic QUnit stuff. This is beyond the scope of this course, so I'm just copying and pasting from the QUnit documentation. I'm adding a test folder with an index page that has this code. See how it calls the QUnit from jQuery, calls test.js, which is also in that folder, and that looks like this. Assert OK if 1 equals 1 and call it passed. Let's take a look at this in the browser. You'll see that when I load this page, I get 1 assertion of 1 passed. And that's what we want to see. But now let's run it through Grunt. Now we take a look at this entry here, QUnit, with 1 target, and the options are pretty simple. Test this URL. This happens to be how I have this set up through my Apache virtual hosts. Now we'll head over to the terminal. We'll type grunt QUnit. And there we go. Now we see that it's passed. Let's head back to our editor. And we'll go all the way down to our watch statement. And we'll add testing. Files. Let's test any change to JavaScript or HTML or PHP. Anytime those change, we'll run the tasks of QUnit. Now we'll run our grunt watch again. And in our editor, we'll introduce an error on purpose. We'll head back there, You'll see that it's changed, it's running, and there's our error. This video covered using QUnit to perform JS unit tests. In the next video, we'll talk about how to trigger Behat tests. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript task runner. The last video talked about QUnit for unit testing, but what about behavior testing? Behat to the rescue. Behat is a relatively new technology that allows us to test actual user stories. Unit tests are great for ensuring that code is tight, but it may not always ensure that functioning objectives are met. Behat uses a very readable syntax that looks something like this. Feature, page check. This is just the name of the feature. Then there's this 3-line description that follows in order to, as a, I need to format. In order to make sure my site is working, as a user, I need to see grunt on the page. Then we have an @JavaScript flag. This tells it to run in a browser. The actual tests are written like this. Scenario name, then a series of given, when, and then statements. Take this simple example. Scenario, searching for Behat. Given I go to grunt.danmac.com, then I should see grunt. My simple feature to test doesn't need any custom step definitions, as it just uses functionality already built into the Mink extension. The first thing to do is install Behat. Again, that's a little too much for this course, but it involves compiling through Composer. Behat comes with its own set of requirements like Mink and Phantom.js for web testing. I'm not going to lead you on and have you think it's an easy process, but once you're able to run your tests with the Behat command, you're ready to hook it up to Grunt. Now that you've installed Behat and the grunt-behat plugin, let's go ahead and take a look at our configuration. There are a number of useful options in the grunt-behat package. Let's take a look at this setup. Test is simply our target name. Use whatever you want here. In the options, you'll see output. This is asking whether you want to see the Behat output in the grunt report or not. I like to leave it on, but feel free to have it run silently. Fail on undefined is specific to Behat and is asking whether grunt should stop with a failure if a step definition isn't available. Sometimes you just want to test what you have available before all step definitions have been written, so I like to leave this false. Fail on failed is just what you think. It will cause grunt to fail if there's a failed step. CMD and features are the paths to the Behat executable and the features folder. The flags option allows you to set specific Behat options. This one sets the output to pretty. Now we'll come back to our terminal and we'll type grunt behat, hit return. You'll see it spawn a window really quickly. Tested it and everything come back good. This video covered running Behat tests through Grunt. If you actually installed Behat, got it working, then wired up to Grunt, you should consider a well-earned break. This section also covered JSLint and QUnit. In the next section, we'll discover deployment packages. Hello again, and welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript task runner. In the last section, we talked about some testing options, and in this section, we're going to talk about deploying our projects. In this video, we'll discuss creating a deployment package. This will involve integrating all of the tasks we've used so far tied together. First step is to tie all of our tasks together to create a clean package of only production-ready files. Let's look at what we already have. Our current build task includes compass prod. This compiles our CSS into a nice compact format. Concat, which creates one file out of many. Copy, which moves the files to a new distribution folder. Then finally, CSSmin, which minifies the results. That's a pretty good start, but let's zip it so that we can easily send one file. So we'll run npm install grunt-contrib-compress-save-dev. And once that's done installing, we'll go ahead and run back over to our editor. Here you can see I've added a compress task with one target of main. And under the options, I have an archive name, which is site.zip. And under the files, we have an object that contains expand equals true. This is the file system command that lets us traverse the file system. Source, everything under the distribution folder. And then destination at the root of this folder. Now we'll go down to our build task here. And we'll go ahead and add compress. We'll hit save there. Go over to our terminal. Type grunt build. Then you'll see it runs compass, concat, copy, CSSmin, compress, And now if I go open dot, you can see that right here I have a new zip file created just now. But let's say you want to do deploy to a testing server without compressed code. Let's create another target. First, we'll add a dev task that includes the same items. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, paste it, but I'm going to call this task dev, and I'm going to change my targets, and I'm going to add some new targets to these. Adding dev to all of them. There we go. Now we'll go through the tasks listed and we'll add prod to the existing targets, then add a dev target. Here we have compass, which already had a dev and a prod for different outputs. Then we have concat. Let's go ahead and add a new one here. We'll add dev to this. And we will still send it to process because that's the folder we're just using to process stuff. We'll go to copy for prod. We're just going to copy this whole thing. Rename it dev. And then we're going to change the destination to dev. Great. Now we'll keep going to CSS-min. It's already got a prod target. We'll add dev. Expand is true. We'll send it to a dev folder. Dev. Last thing I'm going to do is go back down to our dev build task and remove the compress. We actually don't want to compress it this time. We'll hit save, and we'll go back over to our terminal, and we'll type grunt dev. This time I'm going to use a new flag, verbose, so we can really see what's going on in each task. Look at all that stuff. And there you go. That's how we create two different targeted packages. In this video, we figured out how to create a clean deployment package by evaluating what we had, chaining our existing tasks together, then adding grunt-contrib-compress to zip the resulting files. In the next video, we'll go over Git integration. Hello again, and welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript task runner. The last video in our series talked about using targets to create deployment packages. If you're using Git for source control, and you should be, you could determine that you want the build to fail if there are unstaged commits, or you might want to run your tests first. Let's try both. Let's install grunt-git in our terminal. Once that's done, we'll head back to our editor. And in our editor, we'll just use the default that comes with the README, except we'll change the source to dot. That signifies everything in this directory. Now we'll run it, and you'll see that we're now committing to Git. Great job! Now in our terminal, we'll run grunt git commit. And you'll notice up here that I have a flag in my prompt that's telling me that this is yellow with a plus or minus. That's telling me that Git was changed, and now it's telling me that it's up to date with master. Nice job! Now we'll make sure that the tests are run before any commits. We'll do an install of grunt-githooks --save dev. Now once that's done, we'll head back to our editor. Now the grunt githooks plugin is a little different because what we're going to do is we're going to say pre-commit. So we're going to register a pre-commit githook to run grunt test. Now what this does is when we go to our terminal and we type grunt githooks, it will register that with Git. Now when we run grunt commit, it will actually run our tests. And guess what? They're still broken from earlier. Let's go back really quick and fix them. Let's open up our Q unit, change that 3 back into a 1, hit save, come back here, run git commit. It should run our tests. And now we're good. And we're all committed. Wonderful. Now let's make one more change. We'll go back to our editor. We'll go all the way to the bottom. And right before our build task, we'll add commit. Now, nothing will get to production until it's been tested and committed to Git. This is a great workflow. This video covered using Git with Grunt and making sure our code is tested and committed. In the next video, we'll create a task that actually sends our files to our server using rsync. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript task runner. In the last video, we talked about integrating Git into our workflow. This video will focus on deploying files to a production server with rsync. As always, we'll do a quick install of grunt rsync, and then we'll head over to our editor. We then configure our task. The options here are from the README of the rsync plugin. Verbose will show all the files being transferred. The exclude is pretty self-explanatory. No Git, SCSS, or Node modules need to be transferred. And the recursive flag ensures that it will grab all the files within the given path. The target options are source, which is the source files to transfer. The destination is the directory structure that the files will be moved in. Make sure you pay attention to trailing slashes. The host server is the server that you'll be transferring to. This assumes that you have keys on the server, otherwise you'll be asked for a password. And the delete flag simply deletes any file that exists in the destination but not the source. And you can see I've added another target for the prod directory, or server as your case may be. Now we'll add a couple new deploy tasks. I'm going to copy an existing one. I'm going to rename it deploy dev, and I'm going to call the dev task, and then call my rsync dev. I'm also going to take out any type of compression, since now I'm going to be sending this up via rsync. And we'll add one for prod. Now I can simply build the files with the dev command, or I can send them up to the server with the deploy dev command. Now when we run this command, it will do the entire build and rsync it up to the server. There's the rsync there, happening as we speak. Perfect. In this video, we learned how to use rsync to deploy our files to a server. In this section, we went over how to create and deploy a package, how to hook up our grunt to Git, and then how to use rsync to move our files to the servers. In the next section, we'll wrap up our course with a talk about how to add prompts and custom commands to grunt. Welcome back to the final section in our series, Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript task runner. In the last section, we talked about some different ways to make your project easy to deploy. In this section, we'll be talking about using custom commands and prompts. In this video, we'll talk about how we can really run anything we want in Grunt, even if there is no plugin. I'm using a program called Drush, which gives me a command line interface into the Drupal content management system. Unfortunately, though, there's no plugin available for this. Now at this point, we could talk about plugins, how to create your own, and how to publish, but that's a little beyond the time we have for this video, so we'll look at how to simply call the Drush command from Grunt. First things first, we do an install of grunt-exec. Of course, we do the save dev. And then once that's done, we'll head back over to our editor. Now the exec setup is pretty straightforward. We have our task here, our target, and then we have our command, drush status. And then standard out equals true means that it'll print the results of drush status to our console. We do grunt exec, and there's our output. Now we come back here, we can do a little more with this. Let's see how to add some options. And now I just switch that to a function. So now the command is going to start with drush status, but it's going to look for an option of buggy, and then we'll add the D flag, which is actually just debug for Drush. So let's see what happens when we run it now with the buggy flag. Grunt exec-buggy. All sorts of new stuff. Now what if we want to do something with the results of that output? Let's add a callback that parses the data and prints what we want out of it. Let's say I want to grab the Drush version out of this. Yeah, I know there are easy ways to do that, but this will serve as a good example. I'll add the callback option here and assign a function. The function does an index of to search for the words Drush configuration, finds the proper length, then pulls the substring out. Then it logs it to the console. And since we're logging our own stuff to the console, we're going to turn the standard out to false. Let's take a look and see what this does. There we go, Drush version right there. Now what if we wanted to add our own options to this? Let's take a look at what that would look like. Now what I've done here is I've added an if statement, if grunt.config.data.exec.drush.options.trim obviously equals true, then let's trim it. That's looking for this option right here. And if you follow this from the top of the tree, it goes grunt config data exec drush options and then trim. So if this is true, like it is now, we'll run that and see what we want to see. If we change this to false, it will no longer do that. So now I've given two examples of how to use two different types of options with Drush exec. In this video, we figured out how to call any CLI command we want, with or without options, then finally how to use the results and output our own massage data. The next video will go over how to use prompts. Hello again. Welcome back to Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript task runner. In our last video, we learned how to use grunt to call any CLI command and how to deal with the output. We also learned how to use options, but as I was writing this, I had to go back and figure out the proper way to use them. Who can remember all those options? Luckily, there's a solution for that. Let's do a quick install of grunt prompt. And we'll head back to the editor. Now over in our editor, you can see this entry. This task is called prompt. And under Drush, I have options. And under options, I have questions. Now you can see the message, do you want just the Drush version? Now this config, you'll notice that this points to our exec option. This is the same option we created right here, exec.drush.options.trim. Now what this will do is it'll ask a confirmation question, do you want just the Drush version? And if we say just return, that will hit the default of false. If we hit yes, it will change this trim option to true, which will then trim it. Let's see this in action. Before we see it in action though, let's do a new task. I have one called version, and it's calling prompt and then exec. Now we'll type grunt version. Do you want just the version? Well, let's say no. Now we get everything. We'll do it again. This time we'll say yes, just the version, and we get just the version. And that's how you can use prompts in your grunt file. There still remains one kind of weird issue, is having to watch your terminal window for results. To solve this, we can add integration into our system's notification system. This works with OS X and Windows 8 or above. First, we'll do a quick install of grunt notify. npm install grunt-notify, save dev. Now we'll head back over to our editor. Now in order to get notifications for tasks that have failed, we need to, well, nothing. That's actually built into grunt notify. Let's give it a whirl. I'm going to go ahead and run grunt test because I know that I don't have my Selenium server running, so this should fail. We'll run that, we'll head over to our editor, and there's our notification right there. In this video, we figured out how to use prompts in our grunt tasks and how to add system notifications. In the next video, we'll talk about how to create plugins, and that'll wrap up our course. Welcome back to the final video in this series, Introducing Grunt, the JavaScript task runner. The last video talked about using prompts for custom commands. But what if you want to let other people use your work? Then you want to publish a grunt plugin. We'll use Yeoman for that. We're going to install the Yeoman generator. This is a generator that can give you a good jumpstart on a bunch of different stuff, but it's kind of past the scope of this project to really explain it. So we'll just go ahead and install it. I'm using the G flag to install it globally. And once that's done running, we're going to run npm install generator-grunt plugin. This will allow us to actually generate a grunt plugin template. So we'll do npm install generator grunt plugin. And I'm not going to bother saving this to dev because I don't need the next person to have this dependency. All right, and once this is finished running, we're going to create a new directory. and we're going to run this command in it. Let's give this a second to finish. There we go. First, we're going to make a directory. We'll go into that directory. Now we'll run yo grunt plugin. Plugin name. Super awesome name. Description. Obs. The best. Version 0.0.1 sounds good to me. Project Git repository. Nope. Project homepage. Nope. License. MIT sounds good. Author name. I am Dan Lin. Author email. Not necessary. Author URL. Nope. What versions of Node does it run on? Let's keep the default. Version of Grunt. Let's do that. I'm all done. Now we have to run npm install to get all the dependencies. Now the grunt file in here is not where you do the work, but rather how you'll run and test your new plugin. Now we'll open the JS file in the tasks folder. This should be renamed to match your plugin, and this is where you do your magic. There are some wonderful grunt APIs that can help you accomplish your tasks, but for the sake of brevity, this is where I'll leave it up to your imagination on what to actually accomplish with your new plugin. It comes with some testing built in so that you can ensure that it will all work for others. Once you've made your changes and your tests have been written and are passing, you're ready to publish your plugin. Check your package.json file. Make sure that you've included all of the dependencies and you've included the keyword grunt plugin. That ensures that it will be found in a search for npm on grunt plugins. Now the easy part. We go to our terminal and we type npm publish and hit return. I'm obviously not going to submit my super awesome name plugin, but that's all you have to do to publish a grunt plugin. Congratulations! In this video, we covered how to create plugins by installing Yeoman and the template, modifying the JS, then testing and publishing it. That wraps up this section where we covered running CLI commands, using prompts, and creating plugins. And with that, we've come to the end of our course. As a recap, we covered these 7 major areas: how to get started, the different ways to run grunt, compiling code, manipulating files, how to test your projects in various ways, deploying your code, and finally, how to run custom commands. I hope you've enjoyed this series and have a new tool at your disposal. Thanks for listening.